I think that John Roberts is a guy who really believes that he can play nice. I think he thinks that he has a singular role to play in unifying the country, preserving the courts by but listen, he votes our way 80, 90% of the time, right? So it's not like he's a complete disaster. But then on these very important cases, which he perceives to be really divisive at a cultural level, he always errs on the side of appease the left, don't compromise, don't turn the left's ire against the court. And even just in the last 72 hours, that's brought us two court cases that fundamentally change the country. I mean, this idea from the decision last week, the idea that sex can be defined as identity, gender identity, and not by biology. Gorsuch himself, writing the majority opinion, said that no one who wrote that law could have possibly envisioned that interpretation, and yet he believes it's some sort of textual interpretation. And then today, this decision that I guess if one administration illegally passes through executive fiat some sort of regulation, the next administration can't, by executive fiat, turn back. Like, what is the standard? And the standard is, well, let's just be nice and get along. Am I missing something?
Illegal and unconstitutional, by the way, by the administration's own admission when they were doing it.
Drew?
I think you're being too nice to John Roberts. I think the man is a coward. When he did the Obamacare decision, friends of mine who supported him said, no, he's just telling you that you're going to have to fix this by your vote. He's not letting you off the hook for having voted for Obama. But this decision is really different. This is a cynical, completely ridiculous decision that says exactly what you said, that Obama can take an admittedly unconstitutional action by executive order, but Trump can't erase it by executive order. And what he said basically was you didn't do this procedurally correctly. And if I were Donald Trump, which thank heavens I'm not, but if I were, what I would do is I'd come back to him in a week with a thing from the Justice Department that does it procedurally correctly and really stuff it to him, because I just think he's a coward. I disagree about the Gorsuch decision. I disagree with what people are saying it said. I think it's an absurd decision, but I don't think it's an illogical decision. I think he wasn't saying that sex includes transgenderism. He was saying that if you penalize somebody for penalize a man for doing the same thing a woman does, that's a discrimination under sex, which is a really bizarre but logical example of textualism. But this Roberts decision is just an act of cowardice.
So Ben, you're one of the only conservatives in America who actually opposed Roberts during his confirmation. Do you think Drew's reading that correctly?
I think that John Roberts' view of the Constitution and judicial activism is pretty simple, and that is that he misinterprets judicial activism, and he doesn't like judicial activism, to mean the judiciary interfering in the process. And so if the judiciary interferes in the process, this constitutes activism. Now, the way that constitutionalists and textualists traditionally have read judicial activism is rewriting the law, rewriting the Constitution toward political ends. But Roberts, as an institutionalist, which is how he's usually described, that means that he's usually trying to keep the court out of fights. Now, what's weird is, of course, the LGBT case. In that case, he voted with the majority, but that cuts against the idea that it really should be left to the legislature, which is normally where you would expect Roberts to come down. I have a feeling the reason that he voted with the majority in that particular case is because if he had not voted with the majority, Ruth Bader Ginsburg is writing that opinion, right? And if Ruth Bader Ginsburg writes that opinion, you get an excoriating routine against religious America, and the decision goes much further than it does, right? Gorsuch basically says, don't worry, there will be carve-outs for religious institutions, there will be carve-outs for ministerial exceptions, and all the rest of this. And so my read on Roberts is that not that it's a matter of personal cowardice, but that Roberts was never a particularly originalist guy. He was never a textualist. There was no long history. Gorsuch is more of a shock in that LGBT case, only because, again, there is no way to interpret the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to include sexual orientation, let alone gender identity. There's just no way to do it. And the idea that he is going to backfeed that he's going to backfill that sort of meaning into the word sex, when clearly that's not what it means. It creates all sorts of illogic in the structure of the Civil Rights Act itself. As I've pointed out, it brings Title VII into direct conflict with Title IX. Because now what about the fact that you're supposed to have separate funding for men and women's sports? What constitutes a man or a woman, right? Clearly, this is not what was meant by the law. And Democrats didn't even think this is what was meant by the law, which is why they've been pursuing the Equality Act for all these years, trying to actually rewrite the law to include all these things that Gorsuch just rewrote the law to include. So the Gorsuch decision is a lot more troubling to me than than whatever Roberts does. As far as the DACA decision, the real key there is that Roberts, and when Trump said they just don't seem to like me, That's kind of right.
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of is right, because basically what the decision is if he had done it the right way, then probably we would let it go. But he did it the wrong way, and so we're not going to let it go. Right? And they had similar words with regard to even the travel ban. Right? They said, well, we'll kind of let it go, but we really don't like his verbiage very much. It just demonstrates all of the trouble that you run into when you're President Trump and you use your Twitter account to do random stuff. But obviously, it's a very bad decision. And as Thomas says, it really does leave the door wide open to Donald Trump as he walks out the door in either 6 months or 4 years, putting out a series of sweeping executive actions and then basically daring the next administration to knock them down.
Yeah. I actually go ahead, Drew, please.
Well, I just want to say about this Gorsuch decision that the thing that I'm trying to clarify is that Gorsuch was being a textualist but not an originalist. What he was basically saying is if Mary sleeps with a man and John sleeps with a man and you penalize John, you're only penalizing him because he's a man. So essentially he was saying there are no traits that are natural to men and women, which is that's really what he's saying, which is a spectacular thing for a Supreme Court justice to say. And it's such a bad decision because of that. He's not saying that what they mean by this is you can't penalize somebody for being gay. What he's saying is that being gay is an act determined by your sex. And that's nuts. I mean, that is a nutty thing to say, but it makes this kind of crazy sense outside of real life, if you see what I mean. As long as you don't
I actually
live
don't
real
disagree
life.
with what you're saying, Drew, or I don't even disagree with what you're saying, Ben, either. I think that it winds up being more simple than that, though. I think that these guys put their finger up and they realize the cultural winds are blowing so hard that they do not want history to judge them. What they're the most afraid of is being Ben, is it Plessy v. Ferguson, or is it Brown v. Board? Which one undoes the other one? Like the worst.
Well,
the worst thing to them.
You don't want to be Plessy v. Ferguson.
You don't want to be Plessy v. Ferguson. I think that's how they see their role is, listen, this is all fait accompli. We don't want to be remembered as the guys who are on the wrong side of history, to use Barack Obama's
Well, the history point here, I think, is the key to understanding this. And this is what Senator Josh Hawley made a real barn burner speech the other day about. He said that this decision, specifically with regard to the Gorsuch decision, represents the end of what we have called the conservative legal movement. And you might like the conservative legal movement, you might like the things that it has to say, but the mere fact is that we keep losing. We lose on the most fundamental issues. I mean, they have just, for all intents and purposes, rewritten the most significant law of the 20th century by those 9 robed lawyers on the Supreme Court, and they've redefined sex, the most basic aspect of our nature. We lost on Obamacare. We lost on the definition of marriage. We lost on abortion in Casey. We've lost.
By the way, they turned down, worth noting, they turned down a bevy of Second Amendment cases that would have clarified the right to keep and bear arms at the exact same time they were doing this.
Great point. Yeah,
that's right. And what it really means is that this quiver in the electoral, or this arrow in the electoral quiver for Republicans is almost over. The idea that you have to elect Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton's going to get to appoint the justices. Well, what does that matter if the justices that are appointed by Republicans still vote with the left? If that's the case, Republicans are going to need a better pitch. Hey, you. It's me, Jeremy Boring. You already know that, of course. That's because you just watched the Daily Wire Backstage. As the cigar smoke settles after another perfectly executed episode, why not ensure you never miss out on Daily Wire content? Go ahead and give that subscribe button a push. I'll wait. There you go. That's it. Much obliged, my friend. We will see you next time.